Everybody?
Okay.
That's great. Welcome everyone to yet another exciting Rogues Hollow history extravaganza. I see that there's a number of us here this evening, and I see you're sitting as far away as possible from us here, so that's always welcoming. I thought, rather than my usual opening with my hometown song, I would sing a song that really nails the whole hometown feeling, and I think I probably heard this first in 1968, and it was in Guelph Memorial Gardens, the hockey arena in Guelph, and there was a young fellow who had just released his third album, and his name Gordon Lightfoot, and he was introducing songs from that album, and he had just come back from a hand injury, so he was just sort of working back up into full concert mode, and he started the lovely song Pussy Willow's Cattails. Do you know that one? And he got to a certain point, and he stopped. And then he said, okay, we'll try that again. So he... And he got up to a certain point and stopped at exactly the same place. And he said, geez, I better remember those words because I have to play Carnegie Hall next week. and I thought, I was in high school, and in the audience, I thought, well, I know the words. So I stood up and said, naked limbs and wheat bins. and he said, naked limbs and wheat bins. Thank you. So that's my Gordon Lightfoot story. But this song, I think, hits hometown just about right. Do you know this one? It's so nice to meet an old friend and pass the time of day and talk about the hometown a million miles away. Is the ice still in the river? Are the old folks still the same? And by the way, did you mention my name? Did you mention my name just in passing? And when the morning came, you remember if she dropped a name or two? Is the home team still on fire? Do they still win all the games? And by the way, did you mention my name? Is the landlord still a loser? Do his signs hang in the hall? Are the young girls still as pretty in the city in the fall? Does the laughter on their faces still put the sun to shame? And by the way, did you mention my name? Did you mention my name just in passing? And when the talk ran high, did the look in her eyes seem far away? Is the old roof still leaking when the late snow turns to rain? And by the way, did you mention my name? Did you mention my name just in passing? And looking at the rain, do you remember if she dropped a name or two? Won't you say hello from someone? There'll be no need to explain. And by the way, did she mention my name? So, that song mentioned something that's near and dear to the heart of many of the small towns and villages across this country. Is the home team still on fire? Do they still win all the games? And I'm just thinking, Gord was from Orillia, and of course Orillia had the famous Orillia Terriers Senior A hockey team. Winners of the Allen Cup, I don't know, maybe 1958. Anyway, I just wonder if we can start things in Rogues Hollow off with a look at sports, maybe back in the day. And maybe, Ben, can I ask you to start us off on, I don't know, hockey? How about that? The Leafs are playing maybe right now.
Well, Newburgh didn't have much of a hockey team or a place to play in my day because of the war. Most of the guys were overseas. And we had a little open air rink down where the park festivities they hold there now. We had a rink in that area and a shack to get in and get warm. And until about 1946, when the guys started coming back from overseas, we got things organized. But there was I never played hockey with anybody even close to my age because I was too young, thank God, to go overseas. But these boys had all been overseas and back, so they're in their 25, 6, 7, 8 era. And I'm 16, so you learned to watch out for those guys because they were a lot bigger than you were. But we had the open air rink there, and we plugged it with a piece of old fire apparatus that used to be stored down in David's mill, and we'd go down there and push it up to the river behind Fenwick's garage, and we'd flood the rink, and that was almost every night job to get the rink started. And then we would have some organization, and there were people. Was your dad in on the hockey?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
He flooded the rink.
Yeah, he helped flood. But there were different people that took over and tried to give us a hand and teach us how to skate anyway and play hockey. And we played against Moscow and Enterprise and Tamworth and Marlbank and some of the big elite towns we took on. And we used to have a lot of fun. But like I say, I never had the opportunity to play with people of my age, so I never got to be a Gordie Howe or any of those guys. I was too busy picking myself up in the corner of the rink someplace. I guess maybe we won a championship for the county of LNA in about 1950. No, it was about 51 would have been.
I was going to say 49.
Yeah, 49, 50. We won the championship, and we ended up playing in Tamworth, and then Tamworth lost their ice because they were an open air rink as well, and we ended up playing in Tweed. And not too many years after we had played in Tweed, the rink fell down, so it wasn't a very safe rink, I don't think. We had a lot of fun. It was fun. Wager coach, which is Trentway Wager coach now, they used to take us to games and places, and I guess we rented the bus. I don't know who paid for it. Mac Remington ran the cheese factory in around 46, 7, and 8, those years. And he was instrumental in helping us with the hockey, and he coached. And he took us, a few of us, to a game in Toronto, and that was the first time I had ever seen a professional game of hockey. Listened to it on the old radio, but that was about it. And he took us to a game there in Toronto, and it was still in the era when they scraped the ice manually with scrapers, guys on skates, and they flooded it with 2 rubber-tired little carts with a barrel on them and a canvas dragging behind. And that was Maple Leaf Gardens. Years and years after that, I happened to have a chance to go to a game again, still in the old gardens. And those tubs with the wheels on were on display up in the sort of the rafters in part of the building. So trolley came a long ways too. They didn't start off at the top. And that Maple Leaf Gardens was built in 1930 or 31, Depression years. And I guess maybe Connie Smythe and some of his wingers got together and got enough funds going. And I think maybe a lot of the workers ended up being shareholders to cover for their wages. And probably in years gone by, they made a lot of money out of it, probably. But Newburgh, we held up our end in hockey and baseball. We played a lot of baseball in Newburgh, and in those days we played hardball, which is what
And girls softball.
And girls softball, yes. It was a sports-minded town for 600 people, and we'd get a few people out to watch us if there was anything.
And where was the Ball Diamond then?
The Ball Diamond moved from several different places. Bill Wager's farm up at the end of Academy Street. We played up in the top there. We played in Cooksfield,
Yep.
right down in front of where Rob lives. We played in there for a year or so.
No, not behind the school.
And behind the school, that was usually our diamond. That was Wager's field, up in there.
Yeah, I started where the mall is now, girls baseball, softball. And we had a diamond there. Then we moved, they put us out of there, and we went down to Cook's. There, played softball there. We played Tamworth Enterprise, I think Yarkard. And then up Wager's behind the school, where the school is now.
And there were screens and benches and...
Pardon?
Like, was there a screen and benches and...
And lots of balls, bats, mitts. Yep, we were good. And two, when we had the rink, and I can't tell you what year it was, probably 48, they had a carnival at the rink. And they had a carnival at the rink, and they had prizes for different things. And Henrietta Hartrick, that lived across the road from us, she came over and asked Mom if she made me a dress, would I be a bride if her son was the groom. So she did, but she didn't make it wide enough at the bottom, so I wasn't a good skater anyway. So I stumbled around, but Bill held me up, dragged me around.
This is Bill, the groom-to-be?
Yeah, Bill Hartrick. He had top hat, tails. I don't know where she got all this. But she made me a bouquet of flowers out of paper, and We won first prize.
All right.
I can remember that carnival. It took me about 2 days to get over trying to jump over bales of hay because I thought I was a real whiz, but the hay won out.
This is on skates?
On skates.
Yeah?
On skates,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah.
It was fun. We had a lot of fun there. I remember going down watching the hockey games, and the snow was way up over the boards, sitting on the snow watching the game.
Yeah.
No benches to sit on.
Now, you mentioned 1949, 50, 51, and I think Rob was saying that 51 was the year that the sales barn was,
Yeah, right, Rob.
was built. And do you have a recollection of what was there before the sales barn in that?
The rink.
Vacant lot and
Vacant
a
lot.
rink in the wintertime.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
It was owned by an old gentleman named Farley. That was all buildings in there before the fire, and the Great Fire leveled all the buildings, and there was a big operation in there of a livery stable where they rented out rigs for people to, if you wanted to go to Napanee and you didn't have a horse and buggy, you could rent one from the livery stable there. I'm not sure, my dad used to tell about all those things because he was horse and buggy era. But then, I don't know, after the fire, I don't know whether anything was, I don't think anything was ever built in that property. And it was just a vacant lot, and whether the village took it over maybe, or I don't know. We got to use it to play hockey on anyway for a few years. I don't really recall. Did we have a rink after that? We tried to have one up behind the town hall, and that didn't work.
No, I think that was it.
And then Napanee in 1955 or so, Napanee built their indoor arena.
Yeah.
And prior to that, they had an indoor arena, but it was made of an old hangar that had been taken down after the First World War in Deseronto. And there is a building in behind the fairgrounds there now, an identical building to the one they used as an indoor rink. There was a couple of old hangars that were taken down and moved to Napanee, I guess. I don't know what years, but the first I ever remember playing hockey in Napanee, it was in that old, when they turned those places barns. They had the right idea, because that's all it was a barn and a room for a few people to stand around the boards. Napanee ended up, they had a lot of good hockey, but it all came after 1955 when they built the arena that's no longer arena, I guess, now.
And Newburgh had good hardball teams too.
Oh, yeah.
They won championship in 46 and championship in 47.
And who was on those? Who was on those teams? Or who was?
My dad, Harvey Card, was the coach manager. Ben was on. Woody.
Red.
Gervais McEwen. Royce Conway.
Paul Conway.
Paul.
Herb Finn
Yep.
pitched.
And Norm Paul.
Milt Dunn.
Yep. Jack Dunn was the
Yep.
What's the ump? Yeah.
He was the after every game, somebody took him to Napanee and
Treated him.
And treated him. They'd bring him back, but they'd drop him off at our place. And he'd stand under the window and holler, "Harv, Harv." I need a ride home. So Dad would get up, take him. He lived with his brother and his mother on the Palace Road. Take him home. And that was it. After every game, he had a treat.
Nice. And you say a couple of championship games or championship years. Who would you play to win the championship? Like, what was the league?
Enterprise, Tamworth,
Yeah.
Moscow?
Moscow.
Yeah.
Yarker, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who was the stiffest competition?
Pardon?
Who gave Newburgh the most trouble?
Yarker had a good team. Moscow had a good team.
I think-
Dickie Brooks was
Yep.
a good pitcher from Yarker. I remember playing hockey in Moscow one night, and I swear to God they had about 4 lights on the rink. That's about all. It was just like playing in the twilight.
With the flashlight.
Yeah. And Dickie Brooks was a friend of my sister's, so there's the age factor in there, because my sister and I, there are 21 years between us. So she had married and left before I even got to know that that I had a sister, I guess maybe. But we were playing out there one night, and it got pretty rough. And I can remember Dickie because he knew me. He just skated by and he just grabbed me, picked me up, set me up on the boards, and he said, "You stay there, you won't get hurt." he was right. There was lots of blood flying before the game was over.
And sometimes it was nasty.
Oh. Yeah.
Shall we move on to talk a little mill? Yeah, does that sound good?
I
To
don't
the
know.
Hunts and Canes?
You seem to be the MC. So
Well, I seem to be.
You get to dictate.
It's this aura of mystique that I'm cultivating. Can you...
Dawn wants to say something.
There's no reason why I don't. I just want to introduce everyone to Wendy Cain and David Hunt. And you know Bev Toner and Ben Sutton.
Right.
Famous from previous meetings. So, why don't you tell us when you came to the village and how you saw that remarkable building and maybe a little bit about it.
You may start. Thank you. Well, I want to start by saying that David wanted to tell everybody that we were always a team. That it was not one or the other. That was the sort of the mover or shaker in the group. But I think what we did was we just alternated roles, and as we proceeded, one of us was often in the doldrums because of lack of funds or the fact that it was just such an overwhelming project, or for whatever reason. But we were lucky enough that we didn't seem to fall into this morass of despair at the same time. So I think that's what sort of managed to keep us going. So David and I met at the Art College in Toronto, where he was a teacher and I was a student, but I want to make it very clear that he was never my teacher. But it did happen that we met in February and we were married in August. So there was a certain amount of eyebrow raising, around this kind of behavior. So that was in 1973, and by 1974, David, who had grown up in St. Thomas down near London, and me, who had grown up on a farm near Cornwall, where I started, did not necessarily want to stay in Toronto. So we started on road trips in the fall of 1974, and decided at one point that we probably had run out of options when we hit Owen Sound in Collingwood, because we were in the sort of the second flush of people that were moving out in that sort of, back to the land, naive, idealistic approach to life in the country. But we continued to sort of move around and check out things. And at one point, David said, I think we should look for an old mill. And I said, very skeptically, oh, for Pete's sakes, they've all been bought up, don't be such a ridiculous, optimist or whatever. Or I might have said idiot, yes. And then about 2 weeks later, David's boss, his friend who lived in Prince Edward County, came in to have lunch with his boss, Jack, and he said, just happened to say to David, what are you doing, David? And he said, oh, Wendy and I are out in the country looking for country property. We were thinking about an old mill. And he said, well, I hardly ever buy the Napanee Beaver, but there's a mill for sale in the Napanee Beaver. And we also knew an artist who lived up on Hinge Street, north of Newburgh. And he had said, oh yeah, well, come on out some weekend and we'll go around and see what's available in the country. And so that was the slim edge of the wedge that we did actually see the mill at a day that was 40 below, and everything was so unreal. It was just like you're in a suspended animation almost. And said, well, it's way too big, and we were thinking of a small, country farmhouse with some land around it. This is a big building with no land around it. And 2 weeks later, we came back and found Doug Gustable, who was the owner, and made an offer that he simply could not refuse, which was $500 over what he was asking for. So that was the beginning, and that was in 1975. And so we arrived on, I think it was June the 4th, but it might have been June the 6th in 1975. And at that point, there had been some changes to the exterior of the building, and they had put in a couple of large doors that the vehicles could drive in and out of. And so one of them was a sliding door, so we slid the door back, and we're both inundated with a shower of rain dust. And that should have given us an indication of what we were going to meet up with. But young, idealistic, naive, stupid. We just continued on and started with the idea that because it had been a feed mixing mill, and Doug Gustable was not a good housekeeper, we would go to the third floor and start sweeping and put everything into the grain bins, and it would just be channeled down and we'd get rid of it. But 3 days later, we changed our mind and we made different plans. And that summer, we had no well, because there had been no well in the building, or in servicing it. And there was 110, 220, and 550 hydro service, which was more than we would need. And there was no interior finishing in the building except for one small room that had been sort of set up for an office for the mill. So, and there was still the large equipment that was in the mill because Doug had left town to go and work in Anticoken, which is up north of Thunder Bay. And he had, I think he'd settled a debt with people who then owned the equipment, but it took them about at least a month or maybe 5 or 6 weeks to get that equipment out before we could start something. But we found the southwest corner of the ground floor had the most solid floorboards. So that was what we thought would be a place where we could carve out a small apartment that we could live in, which we did. And we lived in that apartment for 7 years while we tried to build and fix up the second floor, which was our living space.
But,
so the mill was built in 1864.
okay. Hey, just one thing before you get too farther down the line there. One of the things that was sort of strange about us finding this thing. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to know about this. In 1967, Canada went crazy, right? And so a bunch of us from our college came to Quebec, kind of thing. So, but on the way in, we had stopped to
Get lunch, wasn't it?
Yeah, because it wasn't a lunch there. But we stopped, and one of the people that was there knew the area, the county. She had an uncle, I think it was, that had a place down there. So anyway, she knew about Newburgh. Newburgh, this is Newburgh. So I had been in Newburgh, kind of thing. But we didn't go around where the mill was, so I didn't know it was there. But that's just sort of a little thing that...
But in 1967, David had a sandwich in Newburgh. And then when we came back in 1975, he said, I've been here before.
Yeah. So, oops.
So the mill was built in 1864 by Douglas Hooper, and our understanding is that there were two companion mills that looked very much alike. One on the south branch of the Napanee River and the one on the north branch that we are living in. And Augustus Hooper was the brother of Douglas, and each one of them built a mill. The one on the south river branch was a Union flour and grist mill. And so that they produced flour. They actually added an addition where they rolled oats.
Yeah.
But we're told that our building was built as a woolen mill, but in the 1860s it seemed as if the water flow became erratic because of the logging off of the watershed for the Napanee River. So we don't think it was ever furnished as a woolen mill. It was sold to Mr. Dunwoody, who actually built Donna Poirier's house. And he was a cabinet maker, and he was also the local undertaker, but we understand that he parked his hearse and the horses up in the stone building that Jim Woods owns on the corner of Earl and Main Street, near the doctor's clinic now. And then at one point, somewhere around 1900, he went into business with Mr. Gandier, and they produced carriages, which seemed to be a very successful business until the automobile came in, at which point the mill was sold to a man who turned it into a feed mill, which then carried through. And we think that happened.
You're missing the part.
I'm missing the part.
In the winter, they had built a ramp outside on the second floor and opened up a window, and so they could get things in there. And they would take the cars,
Carriages.
carriages. They were doing carriages up there on that floor, but they also took the little, what are those?
Like Model T Fords?
TDs? What are the little?
Model T Fords?
Model T Fords? Yeah, little Model T Fords. And they would grow them up there, because in the winter they can't drive them anyway, and they'd get them painted and things fixed and turned on there. And one of the things that we found when we got working on there is a pillar, one of the we're holding the place up, and where they opened, where they slapped open their brushes.
Yeah, so they would clean the brushes on one of the windowsills.
It's still there somewhere.
We just built over it when we put the stud walls up and did the interior framing. So, but this little piece of history is still, intact.
Something else that was going on, I'm not sure what the time of it, but the mill had hardwood floors, but they were either stolen or sold, and the houses across the road from us there have
floors.
Nice floors.
Now these were really big. We thought they were probably oak or elm, but they were boards that were probably 12 inches, at least 10, and probably 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick. So they were big, solid planks. But they put them on the first floor because they needed the weight to support the vehicles when they were going in, and also the weight of just the amount of grain that they had. Sorry, I'm not used to this public speaking thing. But we spent probably a year dismantling the grain storage bins that were up on the second floor of the building that held 100 tons of grain. And we wanted to be able to reuse some of the wood because they were pine.
We used a lot of it. The walls of it on the outside were 2x6s, so there were good chunks there. And then the inside was tongue groove, pieces to keep
Wood.
keep the wood together there. Yeah. So the top of it was open. So to get the stuff up there, up the roof there.
Right, to lift
up
it. They had augers, and then they had chutes that took it down. So there was hardly any intact flooring, because there were all of these interruptions of having these chutes coming down and the augers going up.
On the third board, they tore off pretty much all the boards up there. So it was just
In order to have access to dump things into the grain storage bins.
Yeah. Where are we?
I don't know. We're in Newburgh.
Oh, Wendy loved to clean the house on Saturdays, and a friend.
Yes, I don't know whether anybody here remembers Grant Esprod, who was a local antique picker and character. And so he showed up one morning on a Saturday, and we were shoveling. There was a fanning piece of equipment that cleaned out the grain and left the chaff on. And we measured it, and it was about 3 feet deep near this fanning machine. And over about 15 feet, it drifted down to about 6 inches deep. So we had to actually physically shovel this stuff out. And it ended up being about 7 pickup trucks. And so we just backed the truck up underneath this big open door that they busted out of the wall in order to get the ramp and the vehicles up to paint on the second floor. And so Grant came in with his typical brash manner and said, "Well, Wendy, I think you're the only woman in Newburgh who does her Saturday cleaning with a shovel." And I thought, he's so lucky that I don't just whack him on the side of the head with a shovel with that comment. But it took us 7 years to actually renovate that space, to turn it into a living space. And part of that 7 years ended up being the time was extended because Grant had found the remains of the wooden trim from a house that was on Highway 2 near Morven. And portions of it had burned about 1920, and the family had just salvaged what they could and put it in a drive shed. And then Grant found this in, I think it was 1978, 77 or 78. And so he came to the door and he was rubbing his hands with glee. I can still see him so clearly. And he said, "I've got your house." And so we had planned to do something that was very simple, like just a sort of a drywall finish with no fancy trim or anything. So we had this wooden trim from all around all the windows and doors from a house that was built about 1820. And so that required that you had to produce an interior that matched the quality of the trim. So David spent a year building the panels that go inside the opening of the window, because the walls are about 2 feet thick. So you have these wooden panels on the sides and on the top of the ceiling of the window opening. So that added a whole other time slot to the project. And then
Also meant that I have to do the rest of the building to kind of, pick it up too, because there was just enough there for a big room, but there were bedrooms and things, and they all had to this, and I'm discovering with what we have done with that, we had so many little shelves and trinky things, so you have to wash and brush and wash and brush and sorry, I got off the thing. So be careful when you're getting a house. Plain is quick.
we went to lots of auction sales the first couple of years because we didn't know anybody in the area, and we didn't have a television, and I think that we couldn't even get radio reception at that point. But anyway, so we went to auction sales and we bought a lot of stuff. And we ended up running out of money, working funds.
No,
So that was in sort of within the first year. And so we decided that we would build a garden, because that was going to be obviously less impactful in terms of finances, which was another naive, unrealistic attitude about life. And we had when we bought the mill, it was just the building and a very small footprint of property around it. And so we discovered that the property that was between the mill and the south branch of the river belonged to a Mr. Toner in Napanee. And I'm wondering, is he part of the clan that you married into?
Yeah.
And so he sold us what is now our garden for a little bit more money than we paid for the mill. But anyway, that's certainly beside the point. And so we started a garden thinking that this was just such a temporary thing. Well, I don't know where my brain was, but we spent a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of money. And we now say that we probably could have bought a horse farm in the Caledon Hills for the amount of what we spent on this really bargain property that we bought in 1975.
Yeah.
And it took us about 20 years probably to do the whole project. And then after that, it just is constant search.
Would it be wrong to ask, you don't need to tell me the value, but approximate?
What we paid for the mill?
Yeah.
Just the mill?
$1,500.
No. It was
No.
$10,500.
Oh, yeah, 10,000.
David's not good. He's not good
Little
with
zeros.
money. He's never been good with money, which is part of the problem why we always run out of money.
I was just curious, like,
Yeah.
I had
Well,
no
that's
idea.
what it was, yeah.
what it would be worth in 1975, you say?
That's it.
Yeah.
And the mill owner in Tamworth, is it Gary Bradshaw?
Yeah.
He wanted to buy it, but he didn't have the full cash allotment of the $10,000 that Doug Festival wanted. So when we came along with our naive, optimistic $10,500, he snapped it up.
One thing about buying the mill was that we didn't bother to have it, what do you call it?
Oh, we did. We were told that there was a problem with the survey.
Yeah,
But
we didn't have one. We didn't ask for one.
well, we didn't ask for
For
one because
a
we
few
thought,
years.
who is ever going to debate about the mill because it's such a big bloody building? Nobody's going to, have any problems with it. Well, so in 1978 we hit one of these despair periods where we thought we're never going to get anywhere. So we'll go and we'll get a mortgage and we'll finish it up and sell it and go on to the next project, which will be more realistic.
The Caledon horse farm.
Well, whatever. And so so we went to, the bank wouldn't give you a mortgage in Newburgh very easily in the 70s. So we went to
They weren't doing it.
one of the trust companies, and they were very happy to offer us a mortgage, but they said you're going to need to have at least a surveyor's certificate, and which was an introduction to the world of legalities for us, and a big surprise. And so we went to Mr. Esden, who was the surveying man in Napanee, and he came out, did his work on a surveyor's certificate, and called us into the office and said, "Well, there's no way that I can fulfill this project with a surveyor's certificate because of this problem with the survey and the deed. There were two maps, and the legal map didn't match our deed. We were like a year off, like there's like, I think 1843 and 1844 or something. And so he said, you're gonna have to do a quit claim because what you own is 11 feet on the road, and it's not, the mill isn't on that 11 feet. Now, the property line angles off in a diagonal and just dings the back corner of the mill. But what the mill is doing is sitting on Crown land. So you're going to have to go through the application to apply for ownership or the transfer of the land so that you could actually have the property that the mill is sitting on. Nobody's going to really contest it, but this has to be done. And so and he said, and don't get excited because it's a slow process. Well, we didn't understand slow because what we had to do is we had to make our statement about what we had done in good faith. We had to find two people who would be able to attest that they had known the mill to be in the site that on the site that it was for 60 years. So we found 2 ladies in Newburgh who were able and willing to do that. And we sent the package off to Toronto, to the government. And about 6 months later, the lawyers contacted us and said, it's an incomplete application because at no point have you actually stated that you have not moved that building. Now, we had described the building as 35 feet wide, 65 feet long, 3.5 stories high, walls are 2 feet thick. And they are saying that we didn't say that we hadn't moved it. So then we corrected that and made the appropriate application with all of the information. And then 18 months later, we were given the full deed to the property. Now, we had asked when we were beginning if we could link the 2 pieces of property that we owned, but that has the water course that goes by the river, and they declined that. They denied us that because they said that's navigable water. Now, if you have gone by our building any time of the year except for spring runoff, you know that that's not really navigable water. But we said, well, we were waiting for the Queen to bring the Royal Yacht Britannia so then we could have tea with her on our navigable water. And it turns out that it's much better because if we had actually had that transfer, then we would be paying taxes on the waterfront of the South Branch because we sent into the government the picture of the dry riverbed in September, and so we don't actually have the building on the waterfront.
That's good. A mill that is on non-waterfront.
It's ironic.
Yeah.
So we've been here ever since. We didn't sell it. By that time, by 1980, we were feeling better about life, I guess, and had maybe gone along further so that it looked like it was possible that we might actually live in this finished space at some point. So in 1982, we moved into the space in the building that we now live in.
So that was that. When we got the other piece on the south side there, the only way that Wendy likes to put her laundry outside, okay? She likes that. So we have a string on the north side, and she works on that for a while, and then she has these things that she makes all the time that have to have things to dry.
I'm a paper maker, yes. I have to dry the blankets.
And she didn't like to have to walk all the way around the mill to go to the other route.
He made me this lovely clothesline that I think is the longest one in Newburgh.
95 feet.
And I would have to go out the back door of his shop, walk on the road, go past the building, come back into the garden area to get to the laundry line. So I would be, carting the laundry out. So it was an effort, but I don't think that was the thing that prompted it. But there was no access to the building on the south face. So David broke out the stone in order to produce a door.
One of the windows.
Yeah, there was a window, but so he extended it so it became a front door. And then he built a 46-foot bridge across.
Beautiful bridge.
Oh, it's 50?
It's 50.
It's 50 feet. It's 46 feet to someplace, then it's actually 50.
Now, it was one of the things that, so many things over the years, when we wanted to build with it or something, or we wanted to find something, and thinking, you go around and antique stuff sort of thing for one thing, but I worked a lot with metal sort of thing. That was sort of what I did, as well as wooden. So this bridge, because of the length of it, because of the water, we could not put anything in the water, right? So we couldn't put posts and stuff there. So we had to span the whole thing. And I don't know if people remember in Kingston, there was a place that,
Harold's Demolition.
yeah, the demolition place there. And so I got a lot of great stuff there. We're still using the bathroom sink, actually, that we got out of there. But anyway, so I went down there to see what was hanging around, and I wasn't even thinking for there. I was going for something else, and I go in there, and here is these 3 great big cross, girders, that have come off a big roof or something like that. And I said, oh boy. So I came back with a guy who had a big truck, and the 3 of them, I was able to take one and cut it in 2 and then weld them together, and just enough to get to the other side, and because on the other side I could run it with wood. So, and things like that, they just kind of fell when you wanted it. Next. Where are we?
I was going to ask Ben and Bev what their recollections of that mill building are.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Good idea.
Go ahead.
Well, I remember when Fred Shorts owned it. He lived in the stone house where Herb Keller used to live. Most of these people died, I don't know why, but a lot of them are gone, haven't they? And he ran it, and I think he had a blacksmith shop in it. Was there ever forges or anything in there?
I've been told that, and I have digging up in our garden found horseshoes.
Well, I'm pretty sure he did blacksmith work there, whether be it horseshoeing or, I think working with iron in those days, maybe you were a blacksmith, were you, right?
Sure.
An iron worker,
That's
whatever.
what you were, yeah.
I can remember as a kid, and the bridge, there was a bridge, a wooden bridge. Did you ever see pictures of the bridge?
We have one, yeah. A picture of it.
There's a calendar with your mill and the bridge, and one of these A-frame structures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that area where that bridge was, between that and your building, was quite a considerable size body of water, like a pond sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you had a gate apparently to open to run the flue inside and run the water
right.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. The water came up right to the building, the side of the building. The walls were thicker.
Yeah.
To hold the weight of the water and stuff there, and then they would let it out on the other side. It still is there, running underneath.
Is there a water wheel in your basement, or was there any?
No,
type
it
of turbine?
It had a turbine.
A turbine.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the basement, when we went down to the basement there, the first time, it was just like, holy old God. It's just spiders and gravel, but it had partially cement floor for some parts of it, but on the east side, where the water came in, there's this pond inside down there, and the pond is full of oil and broken up wood and
It was disgusting.
Railway tires, or not tires.
Ties.
Thank you very much. And holding up the roof, actually, sort of thing. So you could say the roof of both. And it was really very ugly. So.
We had a haunted house with the guides one year. Liz Esperad was the guide leader. And we had all kinds of wonderful things, like we had wetted thread that hung down, so the kids would walk in and would think they were in, spider webs. And there was one girl who was so hysterical that she was so terrified that the guide leader thought that she was probably going to pass out, so she took her outside the building and was trying to calm her down. And this girl said, "Can I go back in again?" The guide leader said she was ready to kill this girl. But one of the things, David had invented a sort of a tarpaulin that he was under, so he could be
I
like
was in the water pond.
the dragon. So he would lurch up and then he would slap down. And I mean, it was terrifying just to even see it as an adult. So
I had a terrible long time coughing.
Oh, yes.
After.
I think it was a combination of a viral cold and just milk contamination.
Yeah. So we do have some fun.
Any questions from the house?
Where did you sort, like, you needed wood for the floors? Where did you source most of that?
Well, the floors were all
let me just repeat the question. Where did you source the wood for the floors and the trim? And you talked about that a little bit.
The floors were there, but in order to be able to repair them, what we did is we took almost all the boards that were still around on the third floor, around the openings of the grain bins. So the boards that were still intact on the third floor around the grain bins, so we removed them, and because they were the same material as the floor, so we were able to do the repair that way.
Yeah. And I scattered a bit more from the attic, to get some other parts to put together. So it didn't work that way. But there is just a pine, just 6-inch pines. The stuff that was in the downstairs, when you went in there, Wendy was talking about this piece of really big oak, whatever was down there. That big piece of wood was there because they had dragged so many bags across the pine, and they just did the line.
They wore it out.
There was nothing left. But this piece of elm, I think it was.
Elm.
Yeah, sorry. It just glowed. But if you've never worked with that wood, you can't put a nail in it. It's just so hard. Anyway, I've got still have them under my woodshed.
I can remember you were never, as a kid, you could always find a Saturday's work. And Dean Vandervoort owned that mill, or operated that mill at one time. And he was a local merchant in the village, and he sold dry goods and groceries. And also we had a grain business. And he operated the mill there, and they ground grain there, and it would be shipped in from the west, and it would come into the old station up at the north end of the village in carloads of about, usually around 40 ton. And there was 3 or 4 guys that was their job, was to unload those cars and bag that grain all up, and you did it all by hand with a scoop shovel. Loaded it on a truck, and it was taken down to the mill and dumped into hoppers there that took it up to maybe the 3rd story, and then fed down through conveyors and chutes to go into grinders to be ground as grain. But I look around today, or 20 years ago even, kids stand around the corner, they don't do anything. We always worked. There was always a group of us, 4 or 5 guys, and we'd pitch in and help. Maybe at the end of the day, you might have gotten $1 if you're lucky. Maybe you get $1.50, but you would work and drag grain bags over that same chunk of floor that you're talking about. Wheel it on carts. We had carts that you could pour a bag up, 3 or 4 bags on. Wheel it out of the boxcar, wheel it onto a truck, take it down there and dump it into the hoppers. And you'd unload a 40-ton car in a day with 3 or 4 adult people, but they would manage things, and we did the bull work usually. It always seemed to work out that way. And it just seemed so strange that was the way you got your spending money. And that was, if you made a buck for a Saturday's work, you were lucky, you were lucky.
Did North Paul, did he own the grist mill, or did he run it for Dean Vandermark? Do you know? I know he...
I don't know, he was involved in the
Yeah.
mill at one time, but I
Yeah.
don't know whether he actually owned it or not.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I know.
Probably on your deeds and stuff, you'd have owners, if there were.
Yeah, I guess they were, but that's the other one, then the main river, that was a much bigger
Oh, yeah.
operation
Yeah, yeah.
down there. And it had much more energy, you know, with
Yeah, the
side
dam,
of
the
the
dam.
Yeah.
And then I think Gustavo took it after Dean, didn't he?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they blew it up.
Yeah.
If I may, this is kind of off just a little bit, but this is the history of Lennox, Eddington. The Napanee River, about a quarter mile east of Main Street, divides into two branches, which are reunited at an equally distance from the west of Main Street, thus enclosing an island of about 7 acres of area. Near the center of this land is a cave in former size, occasionally explored by overbold schoolboys, who each with a piece of candle and matches in plenty used to descend into crowded in the hole. They brought back tales of inscriptions and mysterious wonders in underground compartments that excited much envy, enlargement of eye among more than numerous who do not squeeze it for fear they should be unable to squeeze out again. Of late years, the entrance to this cave has become stopped up, and a few village mothers are anxious for its reopening. But anyway.
We've all heard Ben talk about the caves in Newburgh, so.
Yeah. So we have to dig it back up, guys. We need that thing. Yeah. It also says in here, talks in here about what a wonderful place Newburgh was, because it was down in this valley on two shapes, and it was one of the most wonderful peoples in Ontario. So there you go, gang. We're in the right places.
Did you say Newburgh was?
Is. No, I think he was referring to what the author said.
So, or whatever.
The other building that David had mentioned is the old, we call it the repair shop. It was owned and operated for a good many years, and I thought maybe Jim Wood might be here, but I guess not. That's a very interesting building, and I don't know who built it. I think maybe the Dunwoodies.
Sinclair Paul.
It was the salt.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But I can remember as a kid going in that building, and there were old carriages and wagons and hearses. There was a hearse there with a body on it you could take off, put on sleighs in the wintertime and draw it with steam, or in the summertime it was on four-wheel wagon. It was all glass with a seat up at the front where the driver would sit, and the casket would ride in the glassed-in area. Now, when I was a kid and playing in that building, all that stuff was smashed and destroyed. There was no glass, but there was evidence of that having been a glassed-in case sort of thing.
Yeah.
But, and then in my era, that would have been between, I'm a 31 model, so probably 41, probably 10 years old maybe. We used to sort of play in that whole building, and anything as you could get into a crack, why, that's where you went, see what was in there. And I can remember very distinctly seeing these items in that building. And I'm sure that probably Jim's dad cleaned it out when they bought that right after the war, probably
Yeah.
46 maybe they came here.
Yeah, he came in 46.
And made it into a repair shop at that time. Up in the upper second story of it is a very a nice hardwood floor, or was, and that was a roller skating rink. And my sister was, like I say, 21 years older than me, but apparently going through our old attic at home, there were roller skates, and obviously they were used by she or some of her girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever that had roller skated in the upstairs of that building.
But that's where Woody and Gervais lived
Yeah, at one time
After,
when they first
when they first came
took
and
over.
started. Yeah.
They lived upstairs there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jim has put a lot of money in it and really fixed the building up again, and he has some plan in mind, but I'm not too sure what. I've heard rumors that he'd like to have a museum of some type.
Yeah.
But I don't know how far he's pursued that. I don't know.
And Ben, did you have a school bus incident with that building? Or was that...
I didn't, but the old Trentway Wager, he tried the river both sides over the course of the time coming to deliver kids to Newburgh school, because in those days buses weren't too reliable, roads were less reliable, and
Never sanded.
never heard tell of sand. And he'd come down that hill, and I don't ever remember him running into the building, but I guess he went both sides of it, partially into the river at one time. But they've overcome some of that. I've come down that hill backwards too, as a young driver.
In 1975, when we came here, the Winnickeys were the owners that ran the general store. And so this talks about me being 25 and naive. Now, I grew up on a farm. My dad was a farmer, so you'd think I would be smarter than I am. But so I go into the store, and Mrs. Winnicke says to me, "How do you like it here?" And I said, "Oh, we just love it here in the country." And she just pokered right up, and she said, "This isn't the country. This is Newburgh." And I thought, well, point taken. So then later in the summer, my aunt and uncle came to visit, and they couldn't figure out where we were. So they stopped up at Winnicke's store, and the man who was the caretaker at the sales barn, I can't...
Bill.
Bill. So he was sitting out on the steps. So my uncle said he was looking for the mill. And he said, "Oh yeah, the old man and his daughter are down there every day working." And so he was some taken with that. So he came down and he told David this. And David was quite put out that I thought it was so hysterically funny. But that gave me a lot of, because there was so much not funny about that sound with the amount of dirt and grain dust that we were moving. So then I decided that really, it was so important not to be the people from Toronto, because we didn't ever think we were from Toronto, because we spent really more time here than in Toronto. But anyway, so I would tell everybody that I was from Cornwall and David was from St. Thomas, thinking that that was clear. But then probably about 10 or 12 years after we were here, Win Evie had moved into the house that she lived in over on Elizabeth Street. And we were out in the yard making cider one fall morning. And so she came trotting down the street and she said, I couldn't tell through the binoculars what you were doing. So I had to come over and see what the crazy people from Toronto were doing. So I thought,
Crazy's right.
all that effort that I put in year after year to influence people's thinking about, that we were, like them.
Country people.
Country people. I just gave up after that. I thought, oh, well, the hell with it. So I just thought I'd share that.
So, any more? Anybody? No?
Final remarks?
That's it.
If you don't have questions, do you have any comments?
Going back to the cave,
Yeah.
I've been in that cave. It is right behind the little park that's across from the hall, a little piece of land that my dad came to end up, I guess, owning, or got the ownership to it. It was passed on to me. The building that had been built on it, they called it the Workers' Hall or something. It was like a sort of a union hall, only there were no unions, I guess. And what went on in it, I never did know. But again, in my time, a Lynch woman was
Mary Lynch.
Mary Lynch. She ran a hairdressing salon in it at one time. I remember riding by him and looking in the window and seeing my mother in there underneath one of these great big space capsules to dry your hair or curl it or whatever.
Didn't Percy Lloyd live there? with his
Percy
family?
Lloyd lived in it. I owned it then. Percy used to pay me a little bit of rent, and I always had something for him to do, so we worked it out kind of. And he raised a bunch of kids in it. But the entrance to the cave was right behind where that building sat. And we used to play in it. And the Huffman boys across the road would go down in it, and some of the older boys would go down in it. And I'd tag along, but as soon as daylight disappeared, I was back looking for the hole to get back out again.
Where did it lead to?
I don't know, I never went that far.
They said that it went under the river and back up to the hill.
I've always heard
That's
that
what I
story,
heard.
but
That's the story, I don't know
Yeah.
that.
I don't buy that. But
No.
Rick Conway will tell you that in the wintertime, if the frost is just right or the temperature is just right,
Yeah.
that he can see fumes come up through his
I've seen
basement
that.
floor.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that big building where he lives by the river is built right on the flat rock. But I don't know. Like I say, when daylight disappeared, I was looking for the hole.
You're not as brave as you think you
No,
are.
I wouldn't do great.
It is.
But there is a cave there. I would love to have seen somebody been able to have done something and opened it, or. But just as soon as you did, then it's a liability, and
Yeah.
who's going to look after it? So it's been filled in for a good many years, and maybe that's the way it should remain. I don't know. This insurance racket has spoiled a lot of these little episodes that you would like to get involved in, but I never attempted to open it just because of the liability. And
Could you stand up in it?
well,
did you crawl?
at 8 or 10 years old, I wasn't. I could probably stand up. Yeah, you could stand up. Oh yeah, yeah. They had kids had old broken chairs down in right by the entrance. There's space in there, but I don't like. David says it went across the river, so that's going south. To me, the logic was that the main river overflowed year after year, millions of years ago, and washed the cavity from where it is now down through towards your mill. And that's sort of why your river always dried up, because it went through the cracks of the rock.
Yeah. Even now, the water disappears, before it gets to us.
Yeah, but that's all controlled by the dam upstream.
No.
How much water they used to let go down through there.
Yeah.
And the reason the water was available was the area there now in the summertime at the tip of the island, on the east end, you couldn't even put a boat up it, I don't think, in the summertime. It's almost dry.
It dries completely.
But there was a mill, the Breeze had a mill, and the sluiceway, you've seen that, eh? And there's, I can remember when the dam was there, and there was a body of water probably 4 to 5 feet deep up in that flat rock, because they controlled it from the dam there that Breezes had that took the water into their mill pond and fed their equipment in there.
Yeah. Was he a person, was he the person that made chairs or something? So I was told that along our line, there was a little mill in there. And
Well, there was
he made,
that whole island. There was a sluiceway right from the very easterly end of the island, all the way down through, and then you remember where they had the outhouses built there, the cement block outhouses? And the water leaked out and went back down into the river at that point. And there was a sash and door place there. They made sash and doors. My dad said that he bought windows for some part of our old house for Christmas, made from that sash and door manufacturer that was on the island there. And we always cut ice in the wintertime, of course, no refrigeration, and everybody relied on ice, and you always cut the ice up on the island there, so there was a body of water at the end, the east end of the island there that you would freeze, and we'd get 24-inch cakes of ice over there. Everybody put in ice. The stores all had to have ice, an ice house, and we did too. My dad was a butcher. And we'd always put in about 1,000 cakes. And Joan, I see Joan's here, Joan Clark Peters. Her dad was the first guy to help bring ice into the village by truck. Before that, it was always done with horses when I was a kid. They always drew the ice down the island and up Main Street in Newburgh. They put in ice cakes at Walker's store, Vandevoort's store, Simpkins' store, and in our place we took right around 800 cakes if you could get 24-inch thick ice. And they cut the cakes 24 inches square. They were all sawed by hand with a crosscut saw with the handle turned the other way. And that water's cold, they fell in the place. I used to watch them when they had a little notch cut in the ice, and they'd put their heel there and they'd reach over with tongs and they'd grab a cake of ice, pull it up on, and then shove it up a plank onto the truck. So I thought, tongs are there, and this is how you should do that. But I hooked into the cake, and the cake probably weighed 100 pounds, and I weighed about 40 maybe. I went in the water, and old Bill Griff was working, cutting ice, and Bill just reached down and picked me up, and he said, "You get the hell out of here." By the time I got home from the river up to where Chris is there,
You're frozen.
I couldn't get my arms up to open the door. I'm standing up the door crying and hollering, "Let me in, let me in."
Did your mother let you in?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they let me in, I guess.
boy,
But you did all sorts of things. You thought you're helping, maybe you weren't. I'm not too
You're a
sure.
nuisance.
Yeah, probably.
Well, I think that is fantastic for tonight. So if we can have a nice round for our guests. This is really helpful for us right now and for generations to come, what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Donnie.